Hello, and welcome to our fourth lesson out of our Samuel series. Today we pick up with the Philistines, who has captured the Ark. They had a major battle with the Israelites. The Israelites brought the Ark of the Covenant to the battle. They subsequently lost the battle because they didn't do things correctly, and the Ark ended up in Philistine hands. At the same time, at that same battle that the Ark was lost to the Philistines, Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli, died. Eli, upon hearing the word that not only had the Ark been captured, but his two sons had died, he fell out of his chair, and being extremely obese, he died. That leaves us with the Ark in the hands of the Philistines. And so today, that's what we're going to pick up with. We're going to pick up with the Ark. So, picking up now with 1 Samuel chapter 5, beginning with verse 1. Today the lesson will go through, today's lesson will go through chapters 5 and 6 and the first verse of chapter 7. Again, when the translator, there was a translator quite a while back, and several centuries ago, if not over a millennium, over 1,000 years ago, put the numbers to the chapters and verse numbers. And sometimes when they put those chapter numbers, as I've explained before, sometimes they didn't quite get them in the right place. And in this particular scenario that we have today, in our particular story today, they cut the story off about one verse too early. And so we'll pick that up today. Okay, moving on with our story. Picking up now with chapter 1 of with chapter 5, verse 1. The Philistines and the Ark. When the Philistines captured the Ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the Ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon and placed it beside Dagon. When the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, there was Dagon, fallen on his face to the ground before the Ark of Adonai. So they took Dagon and put him back in his place. But when they rose early on the next morning, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the Ark of Adonai. And the head of Dagon and both his hands were lying cut off upon the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. This is why the priests of Dagon and all who enter the house of Dagon do not step on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. The hand of Adonai was heavy upon the people of Ashdod, and he terrified and struck them with tumors, both in Ashdod and in its territory. And when the inhabitants of Ashdod saw how things were, they said, "The Ark of God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is heavy on us and on our god Dagon." So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, "What shall we do with the Ark of the God of Israel?" The inhabitants of Gath replied, "Let the Ark of God be moved on to us." So they moved the Ark of the God of Israel to Gath. But after they had brought it to Gath, the hand of Adonai was against the city, causing a very great panic. He struck the inhabitants of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. So they sent the Ark of the God of Israel to Ekron. But when the Ark of God came to Ekron, the people of Ekron cried out, "Why have they brought around to us the Ark of the God of Israel, to kill us and our people?" They sent, therefore, and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines, and said, "Send away the Ark of the God of Israel, and let it return to its own place, that it may not kill us and our people." For there was a deathly panic throughout the whole city. The hand of God was very heavy there. Those who did not die were stricken with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. So as our story continues, They bring the Philistines have captured the ark. They captured the ark at the battle at Ebenezer, and they take the Ark of God to Ashdod. I remind you, there are 5 major cities. We've talked about this before. There are 5 major cities among the Philistines. There's Ashdod, Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. Now, what's truly interesting about these 5 cities is also, okay, so they have the 5 cities, 5 major cities, and around each one of these major cities is a village. There are towns and villages around that support that city. So, like, as an example, Ashdod has small towns all around it, and they support the city. The city itself has its own ruler. These are the 5 kings of the Philistines. Each one of them rules one of these major fortified towns. So the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of God, is first taken to Ashdod from Ebenezer. Well, Ashdod has has a temple to Dagon, and so they take the Ark of God, which they have captured, meaning in their minds they've captured the God of the Israelites. By capturing this article, they've actually beaten the God of Israel. So they're going to take that ark and put it in the temple of Dagon as a trophy for Dagon, their God. Well, the people of Ashdod wake up the next morning and they go to the temple to do their morning rituals, to do their sacrifices to their god Dagon. And when they arrive there, they see that Dagon has been knocked over. Dagon has fallen on his face in front of the Ark of God. In a sense, what this is saying to us and to the Philistines is that the god Dagon bows to the God of the Israelites. And that is an important aspect of this, that the god Dagon had to bow, to fall on his face before the God of the Israelites. A little history of Dagon, just so we can put him in place. El was the father of all gods in the Sumer, the Akkadian myths, the Akkadian religious belief system. And that same system is the same system that moved out, the same religious principles that moved out into the rest of the world. We can base our Christian faith, our Christian religion, we can trace it all the way back from Jesus through Adonai, also known as by the Y name. And the Y name is a derivative, comes from the El name of God. The first god of the Sumer people, the first god that we know about, the most ancient of all gods was named El. This is we found this through all of the scholarly work and so forth, is that the most ancient name of God is El. Well, the Sumer people, the Akkadians, the Sumer people, what they did is they took El and they divided El's power, because El was the chief god. He was the top god, the number one god. But they needed more. In their minds, they needed more. And so they create Baal. Baal becomes the war god, the god of war. He eventually, in their mythology, Baal eventually supplants El as the chief god. And El is relegated off into kind of a history, he's not as powerful as Baal anymore. Well, Baal's son was Dagon. Dagon is the god of agriculture. He's, as you can see on the graphic that I've included here with this, is that Dagon was also kind of a fish god. He has scales like a fish. He has a tail like a fish. Almost all the depictions of Dagon has him as a fish god. So he is the god of the sea people, which are the Philistines, but he does not represent sea power so much as agriculture. So, Dagon is the god of agriculture to the Philistines, but he's also their chief god. He's their number one god. He's above Baal in their mythology. that Dagon has supplanted Baal. Baal is the god of the Canaanites, which is also in this region. Remember, all of these gods come out of the Sumer peoples and have spread through the rest of the world. The known world of this day, which is, again, this is, around 1000 BC. And Baal and Dagon and El have been around at least since 3000 BC. Those are the earliest recordings of their existence in cuneiform and in writings, is that about 3000 BC or earlier. That's when they were first written down, so they were probably known before that. God goes back in human history a long way in our belief systems. God goes back a long way. God may be the most enduring aspect of the human condition in our belief in a God. And so, anyway, getting back to our story. So they put Dagon back up on his pedestal, they put him back up, and they stand him back up and go through their day. They all go to bed that night, they wake up the next morning, and again they go to the temple of Dagon to do their morning rituals, to do their daily sacrifices and so forth. And this time when they walk into the house of Dagon, they see that he is not only fallen over, but his hands and his head have come off. And they're lying on the threshold of the doorway to the temple. And it tells us here, from that day forward, none of the priests of Dagon would step on the threshold of the temple. A couple of interesting little archaeological things. There's an archaeological evidence here. One of the most, all the Philistines, of the 5 Philistine cities that we've talked about already, the one that is the most excavated and the one that has been completely and thoroughly excavated is Ekron. The archaeological excavation at Ekron is very thorough. And while they were doing that, while they were excavating, one of the things they discovered was a depiction of Dagon. Now, here's what's interesting is that this depiction, and this is, and in Ekron, this is one of the only places where they've ever found this. And this dates back, this is very ancient. This artifact that they found is very, very old. And again, it dates back to pre-1000 BC. They have found this, and in the depiction of Dagon, he's like this. And his head is missing, and both hands are missing, and it is in a parallel line, straight across. And so it's like this one depiction of Dagon reflects this story, and that Dagon was missing both his hands and his head, and they were in a parallel line, straight across, as if it was lying on a threshold. And so that's kind of interesting, because that kind of backs up this story. In some ways, that supports this story, is that there is a depiction or an understanding of Dagon without head and hands. And that's just kind of interesting, and they found this in Ekron. One of the other things, now this is biblical, is there is one other place where priests do not step on the threshold. And Zephaniah brings this out. And he condemns this action because these are priests in the temple. These are priests performing their duty, and they step over the threshold of the temple. Zephaniah found this to be sacrilegious, and he calls them out on that. And that's just kind of a little side note here, is that Zephaniah calls the priests of Israel out for stepping over the threshold and refusing to step on the threshold. And again, he kind of relates it back to this particular incident, or he relates it back to it being something that other people do for other gods, but we don't do that for Adonai. Okay. So the people of Ashdod now have discovered that their God is weaker than Adonai, and this frightens them. But that's not all that happens. Now, then, once that happens, then there's as the hand of God moves against the people of Ashdod, he also strikes them with the plague, the bubonic plague. is how, if you read the symptoms carefully, if you understand the times and the place and the history of the place, you recognize that this is actually a bubonic plague that has attacked the people. There are mice involved in this. As we move forward, we'll see that. But at the moment, it is that God is heavy on them and has struck them with a disease, and it's tumors. That's where the name comes from. Bubonic plague is the bubulos. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but that's where the name bubonic plague, and it's tumors. It's kind of tumorish like things that grow in and around the glands when you get this particular pestilence. And it is brought by rats and mice, the fleas on rats and mice. And that'll play into the story as we move forward. So, they're struck with tumors in Ashdod and the surrounding territory. That means the villages and the towns around Ashdod also have this disease that strikes them. So they said, well, what are we going to do about this? And they look at, this has got to be the ark that's doing this. So let's get this out of here. It's too heavy for us here in Ashdod. And their God is more powerful than our God Dagon, so we need to get him out of here. So they gathered the 5 lords of the Philistine peoples together. And the inhabitants of Gath, the leadership of Gath, replied, well, we'll take the Ark of the Covenant. Maybe they didn't understand the danger here. Maybe it's because Gath didn't have a temple to Dagon. We don't know. But Gath decided, well, we can handle this. So they take it. And the tumors, the disease breaks out there. Creates a panic. The young, the old, everybody is struck with this disease. So they send now they send it on to Ekron. And again, this is the city that has a major excavations about it. They've found a temple to Dagon. They've found all kinds of evidence about the times, or all kinds of archaeological stuff that's just really interesting. So the ark goes to Ekron. But the people of Ekron go, hey, why are you sending this here? What is the matter with you? We don't want this thing here. Why have you brought this to us? To kill us? So send it away. Return it to its own. Let's send it back to Israel, is what they decide to do. Because there was this panic everywhere. So they send it back. Or they say, okay, let's send it back and let's get it out of our cities so that this disease will go away. Because they think this ark is what's bringing it. Of course, it is the hand of God that's brought this plague to them. But this forces them to make some sort of decision about the ark. Moving on, picking up now with chapter 6, verse 1. The ark is returned to Israel. The ark of Adonai was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. When the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, what shall we do with the ark of Adonai? Tell us what we should send with it to its place. They said, if you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return him a guilt offering. Then you'll be healed and will be ransomed. Will not his hand then turn from you? And they said, what is the guilt offering that we shall return to him? They answered, 5 gold tumors and 5 gold mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For the same plague is upon all of you and upon our lords. So you must make images of your tumors and images of your mice that ravage the land, and give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand on you and your gods and your land. Why should you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? After he had made fools of them, did they not let the people go? And they departed. Now then, get ready a new cart with 2 milch cows that have never borne a yoke. And yoke the cows to the cart, but take their calves home away from them. Take the ark of Adonai and place it on the cart, and put in a box at the side the figures of gold, which you are returning to him as a guilt offering. Then send it off, and let it go its way, and watch. If it goes up on the way to its own land, to Beth Shemesh, then it is he who has done us this great harm. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by chance. The men did so. They took 2 milch cows and yoked them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. They put the ark of Adonai on the cart and the box with the gold mice and the images of their tumors. The cows went straight in the direction of Beth Shemesh along one highway, lowing as they went. They turned neither to the right nor to the left, and the lords of the Philistines went after them as far as the border of Beth Shemesh. Now, the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. When they looked up and saw the ark, they went with rejoicing to meet it. The cart came into the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh and stopped there. A large stone was there, so they split up the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to Adonai. The Levites took down the ark of Adonai and the box that was beside it, in which there were the gold objects, and set them upon the large stone. Then the people of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and presented sacrifices on that day to Adonai. When the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned that day to Ekron. These are the gold tumors which the Philistines returned as a guilt offering to Adonai, 1 for Ashdod, 1 for Gaza, 1 for Ashkelon, 1 for Gath, 1 for Ekron. Also the gold mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both fortified cities and unwalled villages. The great stone beside which they sat down the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh. So as our story continues, the ark, we find, has been moving around from city to city inside of the Philistines now and inside their territory for 7 months. And they've had enough. Great panic is throughout all their people. There's this plague going on. There's the overrunning of the mice or the rats, depending on your translation. Some of your translations may have the word rats. Others have mice. It just depends on the translation. The Hebrew word here can be used for either. And so my translation is translated to mice. Your translation may have it as rats. We do know that rats and mice both carry the fleas that carry bubonic plague, which is what their problem is. So the leadership, the people, they gather together and says, what should we do? Let's send it back. Okay, we can't send it back empty, because that's just not what you do. You cannot send something to a God. You cannot make amends to a God with an empty hand. You have to put something in your hand that you're willing to give to that God. And in this case here, the priests of Dagon recognize this. They know this because they have their own God, their own tradition, and part of their tradition. This is again, part of the long-standing religious principles and ways of being that date back all the way back to the ancient religion of the Sumers. Back to the worship of El, is that you never present yourself, you never stand before your God with empty hands. So what do we do? Well, we can't send it back empty. So what do we need to give as a guilt offering to make this all go away, to make our life better? What do we do? What do we send? Well, the priest thought about this, and they says, well, let's send gold. And we'll shape the gold into tumors. Well, first off, we'll shape some that look like the bulbos, the plague, the tumors that develop. Let's build it. We'll create some of those, and we'll create 5, 1 for each of the major cities of the Philistine people. One for Gaza, one for Ashdod, one for Ashkelon, one for Gath, and one for Ekron. So one for each one of those cities. Plus, we think it would also be wise to send copies of mice, or rats, depending on your translation, that represent each one of not only the 5 major cities, but each one of the villages and towns that support those 5 cities. So it's not 5 gold, it's 5 tumors, but it's not 5 gold mice. It is dozens, maybe. We know there's at least 5, and let's say that each one of these towns had 3 cities, or 3 towns that represented it. So that's 4 times 5, that's 20, at least, to begin with, 20 gold mice. At just the beginning. And so there's probably more than that, because there was probably each one of those towns had more than 4 villages that supported it. So there's a passel of these mice and 5 gold tumors. They put them in a box. And okay, now how should we get this ark back to them? That we know that it's God's work, that it's the God of the Israelites' work. How can we make that happen? Well, here's how we do that. First off, we need to make sure that we get a cart that has never been used before, a brand new cart, right off the factory floor. And we're going to tie to that, we're going to yoke to that 2 cows that have never been yoked before, so they'll have no idea how to pull this cart on their own. Let's even make this harder. We'll get milch cows. Milch cows are cows that are still nursing their young. They're called milch cows. It's a German word, but it means still nursing. And so here are these milch cows that are still nursing their calves. These have not been turned into the milkers that you would use for daily life. This is the ones that are still feeding the calves. We'll take the calves away, yoke the cows to this cart, and send it on its way. If it heads down the road, there's only one road. If it heads down the road to Beth Shemesh and doesn't go off to the left or go off to the right, but if it goes straight to Beth Shemesh, then it's God at work. But if it wanders off, goes into a different direction, then it was chance that brought all of these diseases to us. So that's what we're going to do. So that's what they did. They took the 2 milch cows, they yoked them to the cart, they shut the calves at home to make the cows... this is what makes it hard for the cow, because the cow wants to go back and find its calf. What we note here is that they load the box onto the ark, or next to the ark. They put the ark on the cart. They send the cart down the road. And it says here that they went along one highway. They just went straight toward Beth Shemesh, and the whole time they were lowing as they went, which means they were doing something they did not want to do. They wanted to go find their calves, but God was compulsing them or forcing them to do something they did not want to do. And so they end up in Beth Shemesh, lowing, complaining all the way, but they didn't turn to the left or the right, and they arrived there at Beth Shemesh. When the people of Beth Shemesh, which are out reaping in their field, they see the Ark of the Covenant coming along the hilltops, they run in joyous celebration to go meet it. They take the cart, which has stopped in this man Joshua's field. He has no history with us. He's just named Joshua. It is a very common name. Because of Joshua, Joshua is a very common name. The Hebrew translation of that would be, the original translation, that would be Yeshua. And Yeshua is also a very important name to us as Christians, is that was Jesus' real Hebrew name, was Yeshua. The Greek translation of that is Jesus. But there was another Yeshua. This Yeshua here has no significance other than the fact that he owned the field where the cart stopped. There happened to be a large stone in that. And as you know, we've talked about this before, is that you can't sacrifice, you're not supposed to sacrifice to God on an altar made of dressed stone. It should be raw stone. And here we have this giant stone in the middle of this man's field that is perfectly suitable as an altar. So they take the wood from the cart and break it all up. And the word that they used here, the word that is used for breaking up of this cart is that the cart was, the wood from the cart was the right amount they needed for this sacrifice. They sacrificed the 2 cows on this, and this sacrifice is slightly unusual. Normally, the sacrifice would be that they would cut the cow up and only burn certain parts, the aromatic parts, the fat and the so forth. But they burned these cows up completely. They offered other sacrifices to God. These are joy sacrifices. These are happiness sacrifices. They offer other sacrifices to God, which goes in the normal way. But these 2 cows, they actually just completely consume and send up to God in the smoke. Describes to us that they've received the tumors and so forth for each one of the cities, and that the stone is still there to the day that the story was written. So that stone stays right there in that field to this day. Well, at least to the day of the writer. Moving on. Now we're going to finish out chapter 6 all the way through the first verse of chapter 7. Here we go. The descendants of Jeconiah did not rejoice with the people of Beth Shemesh when they greeted the ark of Adonai, and he killed 70 men of them. The people mourned because Adonai had made a great slaughter among the people. Then the people of Beth Shemesh said, "Who is able to stand before Adonai, this holy God? To whom shall he go so that we may be rid of him?" So they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath-jearim, saying, "The Philistines have returned the ark of Adonai. Come down and take it up to you." And the people of Kiriath-jearim came and took up the ark of Adonai and brought it to the house of Abinadab on the hill. They consecrated his son Eleazar to have charge of the ark of Adonai. So we have this little horror story stuck right in the middle of this, or right here in this part. There was a man named Jeconiah, and again, he has no other history. He's not mentioned anywhere else. This is the first time he's mentioned. If he is mentioned anywhere else, it's only in genealogies, as this man was the son of this man and had this child as a son. That kind of thing. Other than that, he's not mentioned. But the people, the descendants of Jeconiah, they were not happy that the ark came. And they didn't greet the ark with pleasure, and so God killed 70 of them. Now, interesting, there is a lot of, there's a little bit of interesting thing here. Is this great, they said the people mourned because Adonai had created this great slaughter among the people. But just in the previous story, there were 30,000 who died. Here was only 70 men. And again, it's that magic number of 7 with 70. So it could be just a number, a complete number, but it's just kind of interesting. And some of the translations may have the number 5,070, because it's very confusing. The language isn't clear. But it appears that these people here, these descendants of Jeconiah, did not appreciate the Ark of the Covenant coming there. So, and in fact, the Masoretic text has it where somebody in this family some of the men looked into the ark out of greed, maybe hoping that there was something in there of value or whatever. One of our translation texts have it that that's what happened, and that's why they were all killed. But the main translations, the ones that are the oldest and the most, what they say is the most accurate, does not have that at all. That was something that seems to be a scribal note that somebody had written into the margin, that somehow it got it incorporated into the main story. Okay. Well, the people of Beth Shemesh, after this happened, they go, we can't have this thing here. This thing is dangerous. Whom should we send it to? We want to get rid of it. So they send messengers off to a nearby town, Kiriath-jearim, and Kiriath-jearim is about 30 to 40 miles northwest of Jerusalem. It is on the border between, it is exactly on the border between Benjamin and Judah. And that's important also because as the story progresses, the tribe of Benjamin becomes very, very important to the next stage, the next story. So the people of Kiriath-jearim actually say, okay, this is great. And they come and they get this thing and they bring the Ark of the Covenant to Kiriath-jearim. And they consecrate, well, they take it up to the hill where the house of Abinadab is. Now, Abinadab is the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar becomes the priest in charge of the Ark of Adonai. And he remains the priest in charge of the Ark of Adonai for quite a while, all the way up into David's time, as we will see as we move forward. And so, that is our lesson for today. Next week, or at the next lesson, we'll pick up the story with 1 Samuel chapter 7, beginning with verse 2. And we'll see where the story goes. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your kindness to showing up. And I hope you enjoyed the class. And so, go in peace to love and serve the Lord. And all God's people said,